Hello, welcome to Munro Live. I'm Scott. Here with me today, trusty co-pilot, Mr. Kevin Hardy.
How you doing?
And today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a recent video that we saw that was kind of exciting, with the topic being Hyundai Mobis' new e-corner system. So we've got a picture of it up in the background here. We'll go through a few. I'm sure we'll drop some B-roll of this. It's much more exciting to see dynamically happening.
Absolutely.
But essentially, to kind of summarize, frame it in here, so Hyundai Mobis is a Tier 1 or Tier 0.5 supplier, very capable. They are a subsidiary of the Hyundai Motor Group. So essentially, they're a supplier that can do a lot of stuff. They also support other OEMs. We know they take up residence inside plants of many big name players, both domestic and global. But essentially, they have this technology that they demoed. I think it was around the time of CES, where they've got this essentially four-wheel steerable and drivable system that enables some pretty wacky maneuvers dynamically on a vehicle. And what was neat was they decided to put it as a prototype on a Hyundai Ioniq 5. And that was super convenient because we happen to be tearing down a Hyundai Ioniq 5. And as you can see, this one's pretty far down. You can't disassemble a vehicle much farther than that, short of drilling out spot welds, which I'm not sure if we're doing that or not.
We'll probably cut sections.
But in any case, so what we thought might be fun would be to talk about this new system, what it consists of, and maybe juxtapose that to how it compares to the parts that are physically on the Ioniq 5 that you might see on the road, and also, you know, what changes would be necessary to make this, and ultimately, I think whether or not we think this is something practical for everyday use, right? So we're going to spend some time diving into that. I think one thing, though, that we should start by addressing, and Kevin, I'll kind of kick it to you here for this, is, you know, four-wheel steering systems or rear steering systems are not something that's unheard of before.
Right.
And so I think when people say crab mode, recently everyone thinks of, right, LeBron James and the crabs and the Hummers, and right, the new Hummer EV has the crab mode capability. Right. But I think that's being done in a different way than what we're seeing here, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, four-wheel steer has been around for a long time. 300ZXs, almost at this point in time, every luxury automaker and supercar manufacturer, if you will, Lamborghinis, Porsches, Ferraris, high-end BMWs, kind of 5 Series up, the high-end Audis, all these vehicles.
And I think that's an Audi down there, maybe an A6 or an A8 that had it.
So.
I think the Q8 had it. But essentially, the mechanism controlling that was a rack, right?
Same thing as the front mirrored to the rear. Typically slight changes, in its execution, but a very similar technology. And more specifically, a very similar suspension layout, more often than not, found in the rear as in the front as well.
Got it.
So this is not the case for what Hyundai Mobis is doing.
Yeah, so with this one, this is sort of a conventional. This came out of the Ioniq 5, the current on-road one. This is a rack EPS system, so rack electric power steering. There's a motor that it mounts parallel to the rack here, and essentially you've got these tie rod ends that go out to the knuckles, and those are going to be fixed at a point. Here's the knuckle here. You've got a tie rod end that goes through, that gets bolted on, and then once that's in place, you've got a mechanical link that's fixed between your two front wheels. And so that rack, when you steer in the wheel and that linkage goes down through the pinion shaft, it moves it. You've got an electric motor that assists it from side to side, but the orientation between your wheels is fixed mechanically,
Correct.
right? And so those wheels move together like this or together like that, but they can't duck walk and they can't do this, right? That is where this Hyundai system is totally different. You go from basically having a rack-driven system, which either for the existing Ioniq had that just in the front, or for other vehicles that have had rear steer, they had another rack, but it was just in the rear. In all those cases, your front and rear wheels were going to move in tandem because they were mechanically linked. With this new system, they actually are totally getting rid of the rack, and they're going to essentially 4 separate steering mechanisms, and we'll show some pictures here as we kind of dive into that. But what that essentially means, so diagonal driving, that's something that any of the vehicles with 4-wheel steer, in theory, could have accomplished, right? But as you now start peeling back the onion and looking at some of these other drive modes, I think this is a good example here, where you see the same thing, it would be on the other side of the vehicle, right? All these wheels essentially turned 90 degrees. You could never do this with a conventional steering rack because that mechanical linkage wouldn't allow the two wheels to move in opposite directions. So what this starts to open up here is just seeing, and this is a good view, we're going to zoom in here in a minute and check it out, but essentially they had to totally rethink what their driveline looked like and what their suspension and braking hardware looked like, and really come up with a totally new system for it. But in doing that, it enables the crab driving here. Zero turn was another possibility for them. Pivot turn was something they showed as well. And we're going to talk about what they actually had to do. So I think the first thing, and Kevin, I know we were just talking about, we had an in-wheel motor in-house. Not something you see a lot of in automotive, at least presently, but this was a major change. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so wheel hub motors are a contentious topic, you know, in the industry. Some of their big advantages is packaging, right? So you could theoretically put them in an existing platform, an ICE platform, and not theoretically, you can. You know, there's F-150s that have been converted, there's all sorts of vehicles that have been converted to essentially electric using wheel hub motors. Where some of the issues get or present themselves is not only the packaging with some of the phase leads going into the motor themselves, cooling the motors more often than not, and you can kind of see here, I don't see any cooling lines, you know, running to the motor assembly itself. So that you're either cooling via like ducting air with the wheels themselves, or essentially just reducing operating parameters, so you never get to that point where you're necessarily overheating the electric motor itself. And then there's just the mass that's kind of that corresponds with it. You know, a lot of OEMs have played with this and then have struggled essentially to manage the mass of the system within the wheel itself. And then I don't say you're always essentially forced into essentially like an active dampening or something like that, but as you start increasing the mass in this system, you may introduce certain operating conditions where you can't control it, right?
Yeah.
And then in order to control it, you have to either add spring rate or active dampening, and now you're throwing additional cost into the system as well.
So early on, you would like people make that decision, right? Inboard motors, which is what all EVs pretty much on the road that we see. They have their electric motor sort of centered in the vehicle, usually mounted on a cradle. So, and we'll speak to this a little bit more, but essentially your motor is in here and you've got drive shafts that go out. So your actual electric drive unit sits inboard, you're going out to the wheels, you're going through like a splined portion in the wheel hub, your wheels bolting on there, and that's what's causing it to spin. So they had to make this major architectural tear up to basically totally get rid of the motor that was inboard and take those motors and package them outboard in the wheels. And as Kevin said, so now all of your high voltage cables, your cooling provisions, everything that you could sort of mount efficiently in the center of the vehicle, now you have to figure out how to get it way out there. And not just to get it out there. I think one of the interesting things is, you know, because like Lordstown, right? That vehicle is experimenting with, I think it's supposed to have 4 in-wheel motors. Like that was the route they were going. But in that case, they're just steering sort of normal distances. These ones, to go to a full 90, these high voltage cables to have to articulate like that, you're talking about a lot of range of motion, and just, man, concerns me from like a durability perspective, but it's
and
there's
like
some
the run,
complexity.
it's expensive, you know.
Yeah.
So
that's a major tear up, right? Going to the in-wheel motors. Another big thing there, they went from 2 electric motors, to now going to 4.
Correct.
So you've doubled the quantity of motors. You're now in Rivian R1T or R1S category, right? The other, I think, next big thing that they had to do was thinking about the steering, right? They had this rack. You had one steering wheel that went down, moved this rack with an electronic assist. That moved your 2 front wheels. Now they have essentially 4 motors that are steering, and they're all independent. So it's not even clear to me, like there's no way that an occupant is having independent control of 4 steering wheels unless that cabin looks really crazy.
Yeah, like a submarine.
Right, all kinds of dials and cranks. So that's a whole different thing, right? To drive this thing relies a ton on modeling different drive modes and more of a software thing. I can't imagine trying to independently control those, but essentially they've had to put a steerable motor, a steer-by-wire system with no linkage to the wheel at the top of each corner of the vehicle, and those are now going to move independently, almost like caster wheels at all 4 corners, right? So again, where you had 1 electric motor as part of your steering system, you now have 4. So that cost just continues to climb here, right? And thinking then about some of the other things, so it's pretty symmetrical, looks like this at all 4 corners, but you can see this doesn't look like a conventional knuckle here. So the existing setup, pretty conventional McPherson strut. You've got a knuckle with a lower control arm. So this is going to be like your lower triangle with a ball joint here, cast aluminum knuckle. To the top of this bolts this loaded strut assembly, so that's going to go through bolts here. That's going to go up to your shock tower, and that's what pretty much all McPherson geometry looks like. Very common, pretty cost-conscious setup. You know, Mach-E has something very similar, conventional, traditional geometry there. This is like definitely not conventional geometry. You can see they made this sort of like giant casing. Looks like a new lower control arm. Obviously the spring and damper are at a different axis here. And then also for the brakes, you know, you no longer have your conventional brake caliper set up, because with your in-wheel hub motor, now it has to be sort of integrated to that. It's not clear. I didn't see where hydraulic lines were necessarily running to it. I'm not even sure what brake actuation system they're using.
Yeah, obviously they're calling out brake-by-wire. I don't see anything here, especially because they have it grayed out.
Yeah.
And they might just be using essentially a motor gear unit to actuate the calipers on it, which makes sense. I mean, it'd be one system they got rid of, right? So there's no hydraulic over mechanical, or even electric over hydraulic mechanical actuation for the brakes potentially with this setup. So that's nice from that perspective. There is an elimination of a essentially complete system potentially. So.
But then potentially 4 separate systems that all have to work in perfect harmony.
They do. I mean, you know, the one thing that's kind of nice is when you look through it and all the different pictures, it all looks common, you know, as far as each corner.
Yeah.
So these spindle kind of bulkhead assemblies, even though this is, what we're seeing here is very different, probably a, you know, a rapid prototype casting, you know, a casted piece in comparison to, I think, really where they're going as far as this technology.
Yeah.
But there's at least that benefit. It's essentially 4 corners, copy and pasted, you know, throughout the vehicle.
And it is interesting. That actually reminded me, I know Corey and Sandy had a chance to chat with Re Automotive about their corner modules. We'll probably drop a link to that video in here. But they had, for like a heavy duty truck, sort of a similar corner module setup where you would bolt it on. You could do either, it wasn't, I don't think it had as much articulation as this, and they still had like half a steering rack and actually had an inboard motor. But the whole concept of having a symmetrical thing that you can just bolt on at each corner and make happen, you know, it's that modular argument.
Sure.
And I think too, as we'll get to in a moment here, you know, this technology is something, they didn't develop this for the Ioniq, right? There was other applications they had in mind. But I guess just kind of rounding out the talk of how we think the Ioniq had to be changed to support this, we can see a little bit of it here. Like normally this profile is consistent, and you can see they had to do some trimming there.
Yeah.
That's on exterior fascia. I don't think the trimming was probably limited just to that. I don't know, Kevin, if you wanted to walk over to the body, maybe you could
we
show
can take
us
a look. I mean,
your thoughts there.
We have the tire in the rear, so we can go there.
Yep.
Obviously, they kind of use a sawzall to cut out the...
And I guess as we're working back, like, so this cradle, that was a question I had. I mean, conventionally, all your suspension links, or like your lower at least, mounts to this cradle, and then your drive units here. But right, we said the motor goes away. You don't have that same lower control arm or conventional geometry. It makes me question, I don't even know if they have a cradle or if this whole thing just becomes a bespoke.
I would surmise that they probably don't.
Yeah.
And then essentially, more than likely, if you were to like look under the hood of that, it's all reinforcements and fabrication kind of going across.
Yeah.
Probably looks like a 60s race car under there to support everything. And just everything here, you have that steer-by-wire motor bolting roughly, and probably not even in the same position, I'd argue. And you'll see towards the rear probably why with respect to how little room, you know, there is with this type of setup.
But yeah, so if you set it in there, you know, originally these wheels just tracked straight, right?
Yep.
So they didn't need to articulate at all. It could be a tight envelope, and that was advantageous because these wheel wells can be spread out and give you more cargo room.
Correct.
But I guess, Kevin, if you start to twist
so
that.
as soon as I mean, it doesn't go far. Right now, I'm already on the wheel well and rail. And then even in those videos, you'll see this is roughly in line with the fender cladding, that the tire is proud. And then even bringing it out, I don't have the ability to fully articulate outwards. It doesn't need much more, but we'll see it in one of the pictures. But you could actually see in this particular vehicle, there's a wheel well here, and there's no daylight, so to speak. And one of the images, you can see straight through to the other car. So more than likely, this entire aspect of the vehicle has been cut out and replaced again with some sort of fabricated shock tower structure to support the 360 steering, or the 90-degree orientation of the wheel, but the ability to kind of turn 360.
So you're saying, Kevin, in that one shot, you could kind of see daylight all the way across, which would indicate that this whole rear cargo area, basically these would have been blown open. We know you don't have a rear motor in here anymore because they're at the wheels, but essentially all the cargo space is gone to accommodate probably packaging the articulation, the beehive, right?
Absolutely.
For those wheels where they articulate. So I guess all of this to say, like, super cool demo. Really neat that they put it on, and it looks pretty. Like the casual observer might think, oh, this is just a bolt-on retrofit. Send me the stuff. But I guess we're here to say, like, under the skin, that was a major tear up to not just the components, but the body as well. That, I mean, I know the windows were tinted. I think I saw a driver in there, but I would imagine the inside of that car is pretty hacked up even just to support some of this. It's not for the faint of heart. That
no, and definitely not for, you know, obviously we'll see kind of the product that they're actually, but when are trying to make. But you know, in this segment of vehicle, this whole area and this space is prime real estate. You'll see people constantly comparing cargo volumes that are available, and it's something I don't see a technology coming over necessarily into this type of passenger vehicle, simply because you're kind of giving up aspect of storage. I mean, they could change it. It could be a little bit different. Maybe the system gets vertically and Z height a little bit shorter, and you're able to essentially bring this load floor up and still offer the amount of space in a kind of a passenger-oriented vehicle. But I don't necessarily see it translating well for a series of reasons.
Sure.
One, as you kind of alluded to, is cost, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's 4 independent motors, and everyone's trying to get cost out of EVs, not introduce cost into it. It definitely seems like it's well suited for industrial and kind of more commercial oriented.
Sure. So let's go we got another couple things to wrap up. We'll go ahead and head back up here. But yeah, that body in white's been pretty picked clean there. But yeah, so kind of to bring it to what you were saying, Kevin. So right, what is the application that this makes sense for? At CES this year, Hyundai Mobis, their CEO, came out and showed and spoke to their concept of what they call a PBV, a purpose-built vehicle, kind of this people mover concept for tight city spaces where people are doing ride sharing. We know they call this concept, it's M Vision is like the prefix, and then they have a 2 and a high, so 2 different sizes of it. And we know there are other companies with this same sort of idea, right? Zoox is one, GM has Cruise as a subsidiary that does it. So Hyundai Mobis is now another player in this space. Typically, these are bi-directional, right? So being able to steer flexibly is important if the vehicle is going to go in both directions. But as you can see here, you know, it's not identical, right? They had to fit it into here. That casting looks different. But that idea of a corner module and the components involved is something that really, truly they developed, and they've came out and said this for this type of an application, where you're probably talking lower speeds. You're probably, you know, the cost of the vehicle can be a little higher because it's going to be an asset that's going to be more highly utilized. You're not worrying as much about cargo volume. I guess you're worried about occupant volume, but you know, it's just it's a different use case, and one that, you know, if you think about having to manage cables and things way out there, and you're going down dirt roads or, you know, crazy, this is a more tame environment that I feel like makes more sense for that, right?
Yeah.
And I think they called these. So they actually, in spirit of like the modular element of this, they called this their integrated pillar drive system. So it consisted not just of what you're seeing there, the corner that articulates and has the in-wheel motors, but also this whole pillar that incorporates the vision system and suite that supports this. So radar, LiDAR, cameras, and because that's an important consideration. For a vehicle to move in this sort of alien fashion, right? That's not conventional to what people are used to seeing a vehicle move in. It has to have eyes on all sides and be able to drive itself safely. So Hyundai Mobis has incorporated not just the mechanical elements, but also the brains and the controls that can give them the inputs for that. And really, to do that on the Ioniq too, I saw some extra cameras that were added there. So when you're talking about, I mean, gosh, I don't see it going into passenger vehicles, both from I have concerns about the durability of having the wheels out there with managing all that, the cargo concerns, but like you said, mainly the cost. I mean, it would more than double the cost of the drivetrain and chassis, I would imagine. Like, you've got double the motors, you've got 4 times the steering motors, those castings get huge. It's definitely, I don't know. I just don't see it. I'm excited that they demoed it. It makes sense. It kind of gets it out there, but I absolutely do not think you'll see that coming to an Ioniq 5 near you anytime soon.
Yeah, definitely not, at least maybe in certain markets. But again, I kind of agree. I think it's more, and every aspect about the technology it seems well geared to low speed urban environments, factories, last mile delivery type of thing, that type of environment versus somewhere where you're, cruising around town or they're having to get on, a highway.
Yeah, I can't imagine at speed, get like the death wobbles at 90 miles an hour with that.
Hopefully you'll be all right because you got the 4 motors. But
get into some kind of weird feedback loop where they're adjusting and trying to adjust. It's nice to have a mechanical linkage that holds your alignment. That is one thing. I mean, I guess you could dynamically set alignment, but they'd have to be homing them to 0 constantly to make sure the wheels track straight. Tire wear would probably be all over the map. You just have all these new problems that you didn't have before, right? But exciting stuff. Definitely cool to see them pushing the envelope. Yeah, we enjoyed watching the videos. If you haven't seen it, definitely go on, definitely watch it. Cool stuff from Hyundai Mobis. Thank you guys for joining us today. Kevin, as always, it's been a pleasure.
I know, it's good to see you again. It's been a while, like 6 weeks.
Yeah, I was out on paternity leave.
And I was away for trading,
bit.
so we just kind of ships in the night. So,
well, thanks for having us on. Thanks for spending time with us. Have a good one.
Take care.